In early August, Premier Danielle Smith implemented a 7-month moratorium on renewables development in Alberta. That kicked off a huge firestorm of controversy, and I'm going to be talking to Nagwan Al-Guneid, who is the NDP energy and climate critic for renewables, about some recent documents that her party has come into possession of that show that the government actually was planning on this probably before the May election, and that they hadn't even looked at the economic impact of that 7-month moratorium. So welcome to the interview, Nagwan.
Thanks, Markham. It's good to be here.
Okay, now the NDP FOIP these documents. Give us a brief overview of what they tell you.
Yeah. So yes, the Alberta NDP has obtained documents that include a memo sent from the AUC, that's the Alberta Utilities Commission, to Minister Neudorf, that they were directed to create draft terms of reference for an AUC inquiry. This was on June 29th. The election was May 31st. So this was a month after the election, we're seeing this memo. The other memo is a memo from the minister asking for a list of renewable energy projects in the province. This is a week, after the renewables ban here in Alberta. So here we are seeing a government that seems to have been planning this for months. They did not do any consultations, did not talk to industry, not to municipalities, not with Indigenous communities. And it seems that they didn't even do basic assessments or a tally of the projects. And we're seeing more assessments right now from credible organizations showing that this is a risk of $33 billion worth of investment in the province and 24,000 jobs. So this is really concerning, and it just shows that there's no real plan, and it's just coming from nowhere.
So if I understand this correctly, you would be arguing that it's politics that are driving the moratorium, not real issues on the ground. The justification was the use of arable agricultural land for solar, reclamation of solar panels and wind turbines was another issue. But I've said all along, that the Alberta Utilities Commission already has processes in place, and all of these issues could have been resolved by the AUC along with consultation and, and changing its policies. And there was no need for a referendum. That seems to be the key point here. Would you agree?
So governments should always have the right to review regulations and improve them and optimize them, okay? You just don't need to shut down the whole industry to do that. We've always known there are some issues, of course, like any industry. This is really just lack of planning. This conversation has been ongoing for years now. We have absolutely a growing industry, but at the same time, you can always conduct reviews and improve your regulations with real consultations, with applying best practices of conversations and consultations with the industry, with municipalities. We've seen this government coming up with different excuses. Once it was the AUC who asked for it, once it was the ISO, once it was the RMA. It's clear right now that it was the government who asked for it. It's just hard to understand why this government is doing this.
So there are two issues here, as I understand it. So the first one is that a month after the election, the government was asking the AUC to come up with the terms of reference for an inquiry. And the argument would be, I guess, from your side, that if they were planning this before the election, which seems likely, then they should have run on it. They should have announced it and said they were going to do it, and they didn't. Have I got that right?
If this was one of the first orders of business right after an election, I think it means it's an important thing to this government. We didn't hear a word on this during the election, like overhauling the whole renewable sector and redesigning the electricity market and everything that they're doing right now, we didn't hear a word on any of that. So if this is so important to you, why was this done a month right after the election? That's my question.
Yeah, and it's a bit ironic because you remember back in 2015 when the NDP won and Rachel Notley became premier, and then eventually, after consultation, brought in a carbon tax. And the criticism was, well, you didn't run on the carbon tax, right? You just said you were going to have climate policy, but you didn't run on the carbon tax. And here the UCP seemed to be doing exactly the very thing that they criticized Notley for all those years ago. So the second issue here is the fact that they put in place the moratorium and they haven't apparently they didn't even know what projects were in the queue. They had to get that from the AUC, and they hadn't done any consideration, any analysis of the potential economic impact, jobs impact, investment impact of their moratorium. Is that right?
Yes, and I would add, I think it's also tarnishing our reputation as an investment destination. Like we saw an article last week from renewable energy companies saying, we do have plans to invest in Alberta, but we're rethinking this. Like we shouldn't face this right now, but we are. My second worry is that this could transcend to other nascent industries that are evolving right now in Alberta, like hydrogen or carbon capture or even geothermal energy, which is bizarrely caught up in this moratorium as well. So what are they doing is just unclear. It's just absolute incompetence. They've been hiding this for months, and it's unacceptable because I remember the week of the moratorium, companies were calling me and there was panic texting the evening of the moratorium where people are like, have you heard of this moratorium? Have you heard of this moratorium? Companies shouldn't be doing this, and they shouldn't be calling the opposition MLA in panic that way. I feel like there's just like it's I think it will have an impact on jobs, investments, and the future of our energy economy here in Alberta.
I have to contrast this with what I see going on south of the border in the United States, because there are a number of states that are adopting wind and solar on a big scale. They also are grappling with some of these issues, but nobody suggests that there should be a moratorium while they sort it out. And you see California, but even Texas. Texas has emerged now as a major renewables power. In fact, I think it's just taken the lead on California. And I can't say that Greg Abbott and the Republicans that form government in Texas are big fans of renewables, but they don't get in the way. And they've allowed the industry to grow without impeding it with actions like this. And if there's any state that's looks like Alberta, it's Texas. So if the Republicans in Texas can figure this out, I'm not quite sure why the conservative government of Danielle Smith can't figure it out.
This as well. It's pure economics, probably. They're seeing the economic value of these projects. We know red states are attracting a lot of the funds from the IRA as well. So if you're looking right now to build the future of your economy and the future of your energy system, that the money is going towards renewables and the future low carbon energy sources. And they're not shutting down the industry because they're having issues. Look, there are issues. Of course, there are issues. These are targets coming up in 2035 and 2050. Like you need to be resolving this right now and planning it right now. It's hard. No one said this is easy, but the world is trying to figure this out. And to tell the world that we can do it is actually embarrassing for Alberta. This is a can't-do government, clearly.
Okay, so are there any signals out of Smith's office or out of any parts of the government that would lead you to conclude that they have a handle on this process and that it's going to, result in something that will put the industry back on its feet?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I worry now by discovering the memo right now. Like it's just the way they're handling this file seems to be backwards. Like there's no real plan. Like to ask for the economic impact after banning renewables, like that's concerning to me. They're also conducting a number of consultations right now with the AUC. They're called open houses. They're just in Medicine Hat, Red Deer, and Pincher Creek. It doesn't include Calgary, it doesn't include Edmonton or Lethbridge, where we have tons of renewable energy development. So I'm not too sure how is this happening in terms of consultations and real input from renewable energy companies and even incumbents. The second thing that worries me is the meddling with public agencies a little bit, just to see the ISO putting out a presser, and even the president himself acknowledges at the beginning of the presser, like, this is my first presser in 5 years. Of course, like your job is to keep the lights on as the system operator. It's not to take positions on draft policies and include political key messages in a pure technical conversation.
I've done a fair amount of work on regulation in the oil and gas industry and the role of the Alberta Energy Regulator. One of the things that's been clear over the decades is that government's job is to set the policy framework for the regulator, set the regulations, and then let the regulator regulate, not to interfere, not to micromanage. And that doesn't seem to be the case on the electricity side. And the policy process also seems to be flawed, mostly because it doesn't seem to be much of one. It's kind of ad hoc, and this is something that I've heard from experts about other areas of government's purview. So, pandemic management during the, with COVID, where the government did everything at the last minute, and bureaucrats are drafting orders in council overnight. So they're error-ridden. It just seems like the methodical, thorough, consultative process that other governments in Alberta have used over the years and are generally acceptable in this industry, or accept their standard operating procedure in this industry all over North America, don't apply in Alberta.
Yes, so you said a lot there, but so governments must protect the independence of these agencies. Yes, they report to government. I get that, but you need to protect the independence, and you need to think how you can protect that independence. Otherwise, you're undermining the confidence in our public institutions and agencies. So that's one. Once you've guaranteed that, the second thing, it would be like what you just said. What is that direction that you want? So if you're the if you're the ISO, you'd be like, we need energy supply in the next 12 years. We need to make sure it's reliable, affordable, and low emissions. But we want to get to net zero by 2035. AUC, go do the work, come back. Sorry, ISO, go do the work and come back. Same with AER. We want to reduce methane and emissions from the whole industry. That's a low-hanging fruit. What are we going to do about this? Like, if we're serious about climate, we need to fix these emissions, and we don't even have a baseline. So what are we going to do about this? Is it going to be carbon intensity? So, like, don't get in the details of it. Just give them these high strokes, right? So methane emissions from the industry, liabilities, and let them go do their work, and let them do the work and have the conversation. So
one of the issues that's I find disturbing is the way that Danielle Smith has perpetuated stereotypes about wind and solar energy. The wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, and it'll make the grid unstable, and it's high cost, and a whole, for instance, she was saying that to get to net zero by 2035 would require $200 to $400 billion. Whereas just last year, the AUC they modeled that, and they found, they had 3 scenarios, and they found that the cost would be $44 billion to $52 billion to get to net zero, and 90% of that cost would be paid for by the private sector, by the generators who are building the wind farms and the solar farms. So the level of misinformation that's coming out of the Premier's office, and then her ministers echo that, I find that quite disturbing, because how could you have even a consultation process when the conversation around this issue is so riddled with misinformation and and political rhetoric?
Yes, it is hard to keep up. It's sometimes really exhausting to be repeating that while you see the world investing trillions of dollars in clean technology. We know that it was one of the record years in investments in renewables this year, according to the International Energy Agency. So of course, there's no energy when the sun is not shining and the wind is not blowing. This is about creating a diverse mix of energy sources for the grid. Of course, reliability is huge. And that's why we've been asking this government to proclaim Bill 22 on storage, which is a key emerging tech to ensure reliability. They've been sitting on this bill for 18 months. So proclaim the bill, kickstart this subsector. Companies are ready to invest. Right now, we see more renewables. It's wind plus storage. Like this is the trend right now. The other thing you can be doing is investing in interprovincial interties. There are solutions, but to keep repeating misinformation and made up information is just not helping anybody. We are not on the cusp of an energy transition. It is happening right in front of our eyes. And my worry right now is that it might be too late at some point for Alberta to be attracting the investments if we do not create the right policies right now.
Yeah, I would argue. I mean, this is part of a larger conversation about Alberta's place in the energy transition, and which is essentially to shift over to some form of clean electricity by and large, and electrify everything. That's the trends, the global trends. And now we've got China, the EU, and the US going hell bent to get that done. And at some point, if the window closes and then you're shut out of that investment, you're shut out of industrial opportunities and so on. And that's the direction that worries me about where Alberta is headed. So Nagwan, always.
Sorry, just going to add one last thing. I mean, this is not unique to Alberta. We know our neighbors down south have net zero electricity goals by 2035. And to decarbonize by 2050, we know the 2035 goal is that cornerstone to decarbonization first to get to 2050. So yeah, I mean, happy to have more conversations about Alberta's role in the energy transition.
Well, thank you very much for your insights, Nagwan. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Take care.